The telegram had said he was a good man, that was all. A good man with a house, a dog, and 300 acres of wheat near Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Vera Olmstead had read those words 9 times on the train west from Halifax, folding and unfolding the paper until the creases went soft, until the ink at the corners began to blur. A good man, as though that were enough, as though that were the whole of a life. She had told herself it was. She had been telling herself a great many things for the past 4 years, ever since the accident took her mother, and left her father a different kind of man than the one she'd grown up with. The kind who drank before noon. The kind who looked at her like she reminded him of something he'd lost and couldn't forgive her for it. She was 26 years old, and she had learned, slowly, and then all at once, that staying in a place where you are tolerated is not the same as being safe. It is only a slower kind of disappearing. So she had answered the advertisement. She had written 3 letters and received 2 back. She had packed 1 trunk and stood at the Halifax station and said goodbye to no one, because there was no one left to say it to. The train took 4 days. The man waiting at Moose Jaw station was not the man she'd been writing to. She knew it the moment she stepped onto the platform and saw him standing apart from the small crowd, not looking for her, not scanning faces the way someone expecting a stranger would. He was looking at the ground. His hat was in his hands. He turned it slowly, the brim moving through his fingers in a circle, over and over, and when he looked up and found her looking at him, something moved across his face that she would spend weeks trying to name. "Miss Olmstead," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, I'm Lorne Haskell." He paused. "Robert was my brother." She heard the word "was" and felt the platform tilt beneath her feet. He told her on the way to the farm. Not all of it at once. He told it the way people tell things they've been holding for too long. In pieces, with gaps between them, as though each fact needed room to land before the next one followed. Robert had died 6 days ago. A kick from a horse. It had been fast, the doctor said. He likely felt very little. Vera sat in the wagon seat and watched the flat Saskatchewan land open up around her and said nothing. The sky was enormous here. She had never seen a sky like that in Halifax. It went on in every direction, pale blue at the edges and deepening overhead, and there was nowhere to hide from it. "I'm sorry," Lorne said after a while. There's no good way to tell someone that." "No," she agreed. "You can go back if you want. I'll pay for the ticket." She turned to look at him then. He was looking straight ahead, at the road, at the horse. He had a steady kind of face. Not handsome in any particular way, but settled. Like a man who had decided long ago not to perform anything for anyone, and had been keeping that decision ever since. "I don't have anything to go back to," she said. He nodded just once. "Then you can stay. Until you figure out what you want to do." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The horse walked on. The sky kept going. The farmhouse was larger than she'd expected. White clapboard, a long porch running the full width of the front, 2 chimneys. A kitchen garden along the south wall, the beds neatly turned for fall, the soil dark and clean. She would learn later that Lorne had turned those beds himself 2 weeks before Robert died, because Robert had asked him to. And Lorne was not the kind of man who let things go undone. He showed her to a room upstairs. Clean curtains. A quilt on the bed in blue and cream. A window that looked out over the fields. The bathroom's at the end of the hall, he said, standing in the doorway. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything." He started to leave. "Mr. Haskell." He stopped. "Why are you doing this?" She hadn't meant to ask it so directly. It had just come out. "You could have sent a telegram. You didn't have to come to the station. You didn't have to bring me here." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the doorframe rather than at her. "Because Robert asked you to come," he said finally. "And you came." Then he went downstairs and she heard his boots on the steps, steady and unhurried, and she sat down on the edge of the bed with her coat still on and looked out the window at the fields and tried to understand what had just happened to her life. She did not sleep well that first night. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around her. The creak of boards, the sound of wind against the eaves, a dog somewhere outside that barked once and then went quiet. She thought about Robert Haskell, who she had never met, who she had been prepared to marry, who was buried now in the churchyard at Moose Jaw. She tried to feel something specific about that. Grief seemed dishonest. Relief seemed cruel. What she actually felt was a kind of shapeless exhaustion, the way you feel when something enormous has happened and your body hasn't caught up to it yet. She thought about what Lorne had said. "Because Robert asked you to come, and you came." She turned it over in her mind the way she had turned the telegram, looking for what it meant. whether it was kindness or obligation, whether there was a difference. Around 2 in the morning, she heard him moving downstairs. Not restlessly, just once, a slow passage through the kitchen, the sound of water being poured. She didn't know why that was the thing that made her close her eyes at last. In the morning, she came downstairs to find breakfast already made. He wasn't in the kitchen when she got there, but there was coffee on the stove and oatmeal in a pot, and 2 plates set out on the table, one of them used. On the counter, a small brown jar with 3 dried lavender stems in it, the kind of thing that had clearly been sitting somewhere and been moved to the table for no reason except that someone thought it should be there. She stood and looked at that jar for a long time. She told herself she would stay 2 weeks, then 3, then until the first snow. There was always a reason, a practical reason. The roads, the weather, the trunk she hadn't fully unpacked. She helped where she could, in the kitchen, in the garden, mending the things that needed mending. Lorne never asked her to. He also never asked her not to. He moved around her the way people move around things they're being careful with, not avoiding, just giving room. He was not a talking man, but he was not a silent one either. He talked when there was something worth saying. He noticed things and named them quietly, to no one in particular. The way the light fell across the east field at 4 o'clock. The behavior of the old mare when the temperature dropped, a red-tailed hawk that had been circling the barn for the past 3 days. Vera found herself listening for these observations, waiting for them almost. He had a dog named Earl, a yellow lab with 1 torn ear who had decided on her second day that Vera was his particular responsibility. He followed her from room to room, leaning against her legs when she stood still, setting his heavy head on her feet when she sat. She had never had a dog. She hadn't known they could do that, just decide about you. Just choose without asking anything in return. He doesn't do that with everyone, Lorne said one evening, watching Earl pin her feet to the floor beside the wood stove. Maybe I smell interesting, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in that neighborhood. She stopped counting the weeks. There was a man in town named Gideon Falk. He had been a business partner of Robert's, or so he said. He came to the farm 3 weeks after Vera arrived, on a Wednesday afternoon when Lorne was in the back field. He drove up in a buggy that was too good for the road, wearing a coat that was too good for the season, and he smiled at Vera with all his teeth and told her he was sorry for her loss. We weren't married, she said. I'm staying here for a time. He looked past her, at the house. And Lorne's taken you in. The way he said taken you in made her want to close the door. He came back the following week, and the week after. He always came when Lorne wasn't near the house, which she began to think was not an accident. He talked about Robert's estate. There was apparently some dispute about a parcel of land on the farm's western boundary, acreage that both Robert and Gideon Falk had some claim to, at least according to Gideon Falk. He spoke about it in the tone people use when they want you to understand something is complicated without being able to prove it is. The third time he came, he told her she seemed like a sensible woman, and that sensible women didn't get caught up in other people's troubles. Whose troubles? She asked. Lorne's. He smiled again. Robert left things in a state. There are debts. Questions about the land title. If I were you, I'd think carefully about how much I wanted to be in the middle of that. She thought about the lavender in the brown jar. She thought about the breakfast that was already made. She thought about the way Lorne had stood at the station, hat in his hands, and told her she could go back and meant it, and then told her she could stay, and meant that too. Thank you for your concern, she said, and closed the door. She told Lorne that evening. He was splitting wood at the side of the house, working through a rhythm that seemed to require very little thought. She came around the corner, and he set the axe down and listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. How much did he tell you? He said. Enough to be trying to scare me. He nodded. He picked up the axe again, not to use it, just to have something in his hands, she thought. There is a land dispute, he said. It's real. Robert and Falk had an arrangement that didn't get written down properly, and Falk's been trying to use that since Robert died. He's got a lawyer in Regina. He paused. I've got one too now. Is it serious? It's serious enough. He set the axe against the chopping block. I should have told you sooner. You deserve to know what you'd walked into. I don't feel like I've walked into anything, she said. He looked at her then. Really looked in the way he rarely did, directly, without the usual slight angle away from eye contact that was just how he moved through the world. "You've been here 6 weeks," he said. "You could still go. I know." He waited. "I don't want to," she said. And then, because that was true but wasn't quite all of it, "I'm not staying because of the land or the dispute or any of it. I'm staying because this is the first place in 4 years where I've woken up in the morning and not been afraid of what the day was going to ask of me." She hadn't meant to say that much. He was quiet for a long time. The evening was coming on, the light going gold and low across the fields, and Earl had appeared from somewhere and was sitting between them, looking back and forth as though following a conversation he was invested in. "Robert would have been good to you," Lorne said finally. "I believed that when he told me. I still believe it." "I know, but he's gone." Yes, he looked at the fields. "I'm not him," he said. "I should say that plainly. I'm quieter than he was. I'm better with the land than with people. I don't always know what to say, and I probably say too little when I should say more." "I know that too," she said. "Do you? I've been here 6 weeks. Something shifted in his face. That same thing she'd seen on the platform that first day, the thing she'd been trying to name. She understood it now. It was the look of a person who has expected, for a very long time, to be found wanting, and is no longer sure that's what's happening. "I'll talk to the lawyer on Monday," he said. "About the land. If you're staying, you should know what's happening." She nodded. "I'd like that, all right." He picked up a piece of split wood. "Supper in an hour." She went back inside. Earl followed her. The lawyer's name was Aldous Pemberton, a small, careful man from Regina who wore his watch chain very precisely and spoke about deeds and encumbrances in a voice that made everything sound inevitable. He came to the farm on a Tuesday and sat at the kitchen table and spread papers out and explained, slowly and plainly, that Gideon Falk's claim was real in the way that weak things can be real, present but unlikely to hold. "He has a letter," Pemberton said, "but letters aren't contracts. What he doesn't have is a signed agreement, a witness, or a sympathetic judge. The Haskell family has held this land for 22 years. That counts." Lorne listened without speaking. Vera poured coffee and sat down at the table, and Pemberton didn't question her presence, which she noticed. When Pemberton left, Lorne sat for a while with his hands flat on the table. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. "He thinks we'll hold the land. He does." He looked at his hands. "My grandfather broke this ground," he said. "He came out from Ontario with $40 and a bad back, and he broke this ground and built the first house, smaller than this, just one room and a sleeping loft, and he stayed. Robert and I grew up here." He paused. "I don't think about it much. Most days it's just work. But when someone tries to take a thing, you start to understand what it means to you." She understood that. She understood it in a different way than he meant it, but she understood it. She reached across the table and set her hand over his. He went very still. She didn't move her hand. He didn't move his. After a moment, he turned his hand over under hers, not holding, just turning, just open. "I'll need to go to Regina next week," he said. His voice was the same, low, steady, "to sign some papers." "All right. It's a long drive." 2 days. "Likely. All right. You'll be here when I get back." It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. It was something in between. The kind of sentence that is also an admission, that is also a small, careful hope offered up in the way careful people offer things, sideways, with room to be taken back. She looked at him. At the steady face, the gray at his temples she hadn't noticed at first, the line across his forehead from the hat he wore every day in every weather. "I'll be here," she said. He was gone 3 days instead of 2. "The roads," he said when he came back. "A washout south of Swift Current." She had not been frightened, exactly. Earl had been a reliable presence, and she had found in his absence that she knew the house well enough now to move through it without thinking, knew which step creaked, knew the trick of the kitchen window that always stuck, knew where Lorne kept his extra lamp oil, and why the parlor door swung open on its own unless you latched it properly. She had known all of this, she realized, for some time. He came in at supper, road dusty and tired, and she had a meal on because she had cooked for 2 every night he was gone out of habit, or perhaps not out of habit. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the table set for 2, and looked at her, and looked at the table again. "The roads were bad," he said. "I heard it rained." It did. He hung up his coat and washed his hands at the pump. "Pemberton says the papers are in order. We'll hear from the court in 3 weeks." "Good." He sat down. She sat down. Earl lay under the table and put his head on someone's foot. She couldn't tell whose. They ate. Outside, the wind had come up, the way it did here in late fall, moving across the open fields with nothing to slow it down. She had learned not to mind the wind. She had learned a great many things about this place. "Vera," he said. She looked up. He had his fork in his hand, but he wasn't using it. He was looking at her the way he sometimes did when he thought she wasn't watching. Direct, careful, like he was solving something. "I want to say something," he said. "And I want to say it plainly so there's no question about what I mean. All right. You came here to marry my brother. That's the start of all of this. I know it and you know it, and I don't want either of us to pretend it isn't true." He set the fork down. "I'm not Robert, I've already said that. But I'd like—" He stopped, started again. "I'd like it if you'd stay. Not until you figure something out. Not until the weather's better. Permanently. Here, with me." The wind moved against the windows. "That's not a polished thing to say," he added, as though he needed to point that out. "No," she agreed. "I could have worded it better. Probably. I'm better at other things. I know." She looked at him across the table. "Lorne?" "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." He was quiet for a moment, then he picked up his fork. "All right," he said. She smiled into her plate. They ate supper while the wind came down from the north and moved over the flat Saskatchewan land, over the wheat fields and the bare kitchen garden and the long white porch, and inside the house the lamps burned steady, and the wood stove ticked, and Earl slept under the table with his head on both their feet, and it was just an ordinary evening, except that it was the first one Vera Olmstead had ever spent knowing exactly where she was going to be tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days past counting that came after.